Okay, um, while everyone is settling in, I just want to welcome you to this event. Thank you all for being here today. And it's so lovely to see so many of you here as well. It's fantastic. Brilliant. So I think we will start. So to introduce myself, my name is Theo, and I am a project coordinator for Disability Equality Scotland. And I would like to welcome you to this webinar event discussing the future of the Accessible Travel Framework. So before we begin, I just want to go through some housekeeping with you. We're going to have sign language interaction provided for us today by Linda and by Neve. And we're going to have captioning from Mel and Gail as well. If you do need BSL and you have not told us in advance, please put a note in the chat to make us aware, and please be aware that you need to pin the BSL interpreters on your screen. So to pin them, hover over their image, click on the 3 dots and click pin on video. We also have the live captioning available. If you want to see the captions on the screen, then these can be accessed via the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. So please click that now to activate it. If you encounter any problems or any technical difficulties, please just raise your hands or to put it in the chat function and we'll help you as best we can. So we are in a meeting format, so all participants can share their video and use their microphones. This is a reminder to please mute during presentations unless invited to speak, and this helps cut down on background noise and distractions. If you would like to speak, please raise the hand function where possible. You can choose to have your camera on or off during the event, but those speaking, please have their cameras on, as this helps in terms of inclusive communication, as it may help participants to see who is speaking. And it would also be useful if your name was displayed on the screen, as this would be helpful to identify you, and if this was the same name that you were registered under as well. So just to be aware, parts of this event will be recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, please keep your camera off, and the recordings will just be the beginning of the presentation and the final remarks at the end. The breakout rooms will not be recorded. So thank you so much for being here today. Before handing over to our speakers, I just wanted to give a brief background as to why we are hosting this webinar today. This webinar will focus on the Accessible Travel Framework published in 2016. Since then, we have worked closely with Transport Scotland to implement some of the work packages relating to the Accessible Travel Framework. We also run the Accessible Travel Hub, which is a key resource. And we also collect information through our weekly polls from our members and surrounding different transport and travel areas, and have run a series of webinars on different transport and travel topics, which can be found on our website. So as we go into the last 3 years of the Accessible Travel Framework's lifespan, it felt like the right time to undertake some research into the framework and evaluate how this work was going to be monitored, specifically from a qualitative perspective, engaging with how disabled people were articulating their experiences. This research and evaluation project emerged as a way for Transport Scotland and DES to work together and understand where to go from here. So this project includes research using key resources from Disability Equality Scotland, such as data gathered through the weekly polls and other key sources, and a report will be put together which reflects on where the framework is now and recommends ways of moving forward with both the implementation of this work, but also effective and reflexive methods of measuring, specifically from a qualitative perspective, gathering and spending time with lived experience, testimonies, and data. So this leads to devising this event today, which is all about opening up this discussion and hearing input from both Disability Equality Scotland and Transport Scotland on their work and priorities, and also discussing what these priorities need to be in each of the areas of the framework, appreciating that all 3 of its themes are integral to the overarching purpose, which is to support disabled people's rights by removing barriers and improving access to travel, and ensure disabled people are fully involved in work to improve all aspects of travel. In order to uphold and support that work, we need to find ways of continuously monitoring work being done and ensure that we are working in open discussion with the disabled people, ensuring that we are prioritizing the right work and providing the right supports. And so on the agenda today, we will first hear from Stephen Dora, who will share some of Transport Scotland's priorities, and then from Lynn Ponaro, who will share some of Disability Equality Scotland's priorities. We will then go into breakout rooms where you will be invited to discuss and share your views around one of the 3 key themes of the framework. And these breakout rooms will be hosted by our 5 wonderful members of staff in both Disability Equality Scotland and Transport Scotland team as well. So I will just briefly introduce you to our facilitators. From the Disability Equality Scotland team, we have James Davidson, Ian Buchanan, and Lyle Ty as well. And from the Transport Scotland team, we have Maureen Oliphey and Lucy Logan. And in these breakout rooms, our facilitators will ask a series of questions and open up a discussion around one of the 3 key themes: national guidance and standards, information and customer service, and engagement and participation. And you'll have an opportunity to share your thoughts around these. We will then take a short break and come back together to discuss what was kind of shared in the breakout rooms, and then we'll take a few questions at the end. So I'm delighted to welcome Stephen Dora, who is the Accessible Travel and Blue Badge Policy Team Leader for Transport Scotland. And so I'll hand over to Stephen now. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm just going to wait for my slides to appear on the screen. Excellent. Thank you, Callum. I'll just wait for Callum to put that on full screen, if that's possible.
I've hit your screen there. Should be full screen for yourself?
Okay, thanks very much, Callum. I'll kick off. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Theo, for that introduction, and thanks to Disability Equality Scotland for organising and hosting this webinar. As Theo said, my name is Stephen Dora, and I work in the Bus Accessibility and Active Travel Directorate in Transport Scotland. And I lead a team which works on accessible travel and Blue Badge policy, and we're also responsible for sponsoring the Mobility and Access Committee for Scotland. So I'm very pleased to be joined in this webinar by some of my teammates, including John Maxwell, who's our unit head, and also Lucy Logan and Maureen Olive, who, as Theo said, will be helping to facilitate in the breakout rooms. I've only got 10 minutes, which isn't nearly enough time for me to go into much detail, but it's great that we've got such a good turnout here today for what I'm sure will be a really useful event. So next slide, please, Callum. So my team has the lead responsibility within Transport Scotland for the Accessible Travel Framework, which was published in 2016, which I'm sure most of you are very familiar with. It was co-produced by a wide range of organisations and individuals, including those with disabilities and the organisations that represent them. It contains one vision, which is that all disabled people can travel with the same freedom, choice, dignity and opportunity as other citizens. Next slide, please, Callum. So I'm sorry that this slide has a lot of information on it, but the message is a simple one. It's really just to give you some context on where the Accessible Travel Framework sits in and connects with Transport Scotland's wider policy framework. So the National Transport Strategy sets out an ambitious vision for Scotland's transport system for the next 20 years. The vision is underpinned by 4 priorities, and these are represented by the column of coloured bars that you see on the left-hand side there. These are to reduce inequalities, take climate action, help deliver inclusive economic growth, and improve our health and well-being. The Accessible Travel Framework aligns with that and supports these outcomes. Obviously, the greatest read across is to the priority for reducing inequalities. The coloured column in the middle represents the 4 outcomes for transport accessibility, which were developed under Part 2 of the Accessible Travel Framework. I'll read them out here because it's not a very good slide. So more disabled people make successful door-to-door journeys. Disabled people are more involved in the design, development and improvement of transport policies, services and infrastructure. Everyone involved in delivering transport information, services and infrastructure will help to enable disabled people to travel, and disabled people feel comfortable and safe using public transport. This includes being free from hate crime, bullying and harassment when travelling. And those are distilled further into the 48 issues which are outlined in the Accessible Travel Framework, which were in the development of the framework previously raised by disabled people with Transport Scotland and COSLA. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the 9 priority topics under the current delivery plan. And it brings us on to the priorities that we've been trying to address most recently. It's really just to say a few words about what we currently know about priorities under the current Accessible Travel Framework Annual Delivery Plan. And to unpack that a bit more, the annual delivery plan process, that is, in 2019, we adopted this annual delivery plan model in order to make delivery faster. And since then, there have been 2 such annual delivery plans. And here we see the 9 priorities identified under the current delivery plan, which was published in 2021. So we know that speaking to people with lived experience is absolutely key to ensuring that we focus our attention on the right areas. So last year, as part of the process towards the development of a new annual delivery plan, we undertook some outreach with our stakeholder community to identify what new priorities we should address. What was really striking was that the same issues were coming up, namely journey planning, information and wayfinding, staff training and passenger assistance, clear pathways and infrastructure design and integration and connectivity. Next slide, please. So we've achieved a lot to date over the course of the Accessible Travel Framework, but the fact that the same issues are still coming up raises, for me anyway, a warning flag, and led us to consider whether a time-consuming exercise to develop a new delivery plan every year was the right thing to do, or whether a longer-term plan that ran, say, to the end of the Accessible Travel Framework in 2026 represented a better use of our limited resources. Our hope is also that a slightly longer time frame will give us a chance to make a real difference, and me and my team are preparing for this by adopting a more project-based approach. So we need the outputs of this project, the ATF evaluation project, to inform our next steps for delivery, and we need all of your input to help generate those outputs. It's absolutely key to the development of our next delivery plan that we think about how we measure progress as we move forwards. Next slide, please. So, I mean, I've pretty much covered the first of the 2 bullets, which I've got here, which are to consider the outcomes of this evaluation project, this being next steps, and create a new outputs-focused delivery plan. But I just want to say a few quick words on the final point about looking beyond the current Accessible Travel Framework, which, as we've said, runs until 2026. And we will begin to think about that in earnest in due course. And I hope that this evaluation exercise will inform our early thinking about it. But I really think it's important that we focus all our effort and attention at the current stage we're at on delivery and making a real difference. So there's still some time left in the current Accessible Travel Framework before we divert our attention onto thinking about what is coming next. We really want to engage with delivery and make a real difference. Final slide, please, Callum. So in closing this short presentation, I'd just like to reprise how it was described in the agenda, which said, Transport Scotland, what are our priorities? And I'd just like to simply say that our priorities are your priorities, and we're really looking forward to your input in this exercise and seeing the outcomes of this webinar in due course. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That was really fantastic to hear that presentation. This is just a reminder that that if you need to pin the BSL interpreter, we have Linda here on the screen, and just hover over her image and press the 3 dots and click to pin. It's just to ensure that if you need that, you can pin her to your screen. So that was really fantastic to hear from you. And now I'm delighted to hand over to Lynn Buonaro, who is the Chief Executive Officer for Disability Equality Scotland, thank you so much, Lynn, for having us here today and for being part of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Theo. Hello, everyone. If I do start coughing, I do apologise. Please excuse me. I'm having difficulty controlling it, so I've got a strepsil in my mouth, so hopefully you can still hear me okay. I'm really happy to be with you today, along with my colleagues at Disability Equality Scotland and, of course, our partners, Transport Scotland. I'm a new CEO to the organisation, so this is the first time that I'm seeing some of our members. Asking loads of questions, and I've been pestering individuals with lots of ideas and suggestions just to understand more. A few times I've been asked to meet up in person, but right now I'm not able to travel due to this cough and some other reasons. However, I know that travel is challenging for me right now. I will get back to hopefully an easier movement at some point soon. But I know that disabled people and those with fluctuating long-term conditions, transport is one area that is consistently a challenge. And that's why Disability Equality Scotland is so passionate about our work with Transport Scotland, and especially this review of the Accessible Travel Framework. It would be easy for me to say that as an organisation, our priorities are our members' priorities, because that's true. We want to hear from you, hence us having this session today. And we're all here to listen. Of course, that would just be taking the easy route out of me chatting to you, wouldn't it? Currently, Disability Scotland's priorities lie in the information that we've already received from our members. You want confidence in your travel, your plans and your providers. You want clear information. You want the ability to travel how you wish, when you wish, just like non-disabled people. You don't want to be judged or made feel like you are a hassle, and I put that in inverted commas, due to requiring some support. Our work on the Hate Crime Charter that initially started off with larger transport providers has expanded now, working with taxi firms and individuals. Disabled people have the right not only to be subjected to hate crime due to lack of awareness, lack of understanding, lack of patience and time to understand what support is required. And that's an area that we're going to be continuing through, as Stephen mentioned in his presentation, that we don't need to be bullied or harassed at all, just because we require that support, because who doesn't need support sometimes? Inclusive communication is another area that we are prioritising just now, because it's come from you, our members. If disabled people aren't able to fully understand, hear or see the transport plans, and especially when there's those last minute changes, then we as a society are yet again putting up the barriers and discriminating against a large group of our community. But of course, I don't need to tell you that, do I? Disability Equality Scotland sees part of their role to help, not just to inspire, inform and influence policy and decision makers, but also to work alongside them to monitor and have accountability to progress, however small or large that may be. We are really looking forward to continue to work with Transport Scotland in the future. I know that the information that we received today, that we've had previously and ongoing, will truly make it a co-designed, co-production plan. And we will ensure that we are continued to be heard. So please tell us how you would like that facilitated. We've got our ideas, but ultimately it's your voices, our members, disabled people, the community that we want to hear. So enough of me talking, let's get down to the real part today. Thanks, Theo.
Thank you so much, Lynn. That was wonderful. It's fantastic to hear. That was brilliant. Thank you, both of the presenters. It was really great to hear both of your perspectives. So we're not going to take questions at this moment, but please feel free to put them in the chat or to raise them in the breakout rooms or to hold them for later. So we're going to go into our breakout rooms shortly. If you experience any technical difficulties accessing the breakout rooms, please put a message in the chat or raise your hand. And may I please remind you to take a note of what number breakout room you are in, as this may be helpful later. So thank you very much. And we will go into our breakout rooms now, and we'll have a break at 5 to 3 and come all back together in the main room at 3:10. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, we're all kind of coming back in from break now, but it was really great to hear that the conversation is continuing over the break, and it's all really, really interesting points that we're going to keep noting down for the summary report of this as well. I think there's some really interesting points being raised. So can I just check, is everyone back in the room? And Callum, are we still recording this part of the session?
Yep, recording's in progress.
Perfect. And have we spotlighted the BSL interpreters for this part of the session?
I'm having can you see BSL at the moment? Not at all, can you?
No, I can't see them. So if you could
Yeah,
spotlight them.
I've been having an issue with that since we come back from breakout rooms. I've
Okay.
lost the ability to spotlight for some reason. Oh, I think somebody else has got the ability now.
I've just spotted.
We can see you spotlighted now.
Fantastic.
Spotlights on the interpreter.
That's great to hear. Thank you very much. Okay. So we've all come back together, and that was really fantastic conversations, and I can see loads of great questions in the chat coming through as well. So we're just going to take a few minutes now to hear from each of the breakout rooms that we had. So I'm going to call on each of the facilitators just to give us a kind of a highlight of one or two key things that came up in their conversation. As we each had a different theme, it's really interesting to hear about what has came up for different themes. So I'll start with room 1. Ian, would you like to come in on how your discussion went?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Theo. I think our room was brilliant. We had some fantastic discussion. A couple of key themes were coming through though, and this might be similar for other groups as well. We felt that there was a distinct lack of disability awareness training amongst bus drivers, taxi drivers. Interestingly though, there was some good feedback about the trains. However, there is a feeling that often transport providers are treated differently to other service providers. You know, we know that the Equality Act is quite clear. If you provide a service, you have to do that in the same way. But there's a general feeling that transport providers are getting off a bit kind of scot-free here around the service that they provide. For example, when we look to Europe, who have level access onto trains and buses and things like that, disabled people are often kind of left at the mercy of rickety old ramps, or whether there's maybe a pram on the bus, or whether the wheelchair space has already been taken. So that was the main kind of theme that was coming through from our group as well. There was also something else around information. Now that's not necessarily just up-to-date information, which is absolutely important, not just for disabled people, but for everybody. We need to know when the bus is coming or when the train is going to be there. But making sure that transport providers are aware of their obligation to be able to provide information in an accessible format to people. And that's the difficulty here as well, is that we're hearing disabled people are struggling to interpret information in a way that's accessible to them. And I think, you know, as a disabled people's organisation in 2023, we have to look at this seriously and think, when are transport providers going to start stepping up and actually implementing what disabled people have been shouting about, not just months, for years, for decades. And I've had conversations with this as well about with access panels and transport providers getting loopholes and legislative breaks and things like that. So they were the kind of key themes that came up in our discussion, Theo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian. That was really great to hear from what happened in room 1. So we're going to keep moving into room 2. And Douglas, can I ask you to come in on how things went in room 2?
Thanks very much, Theo. I don't know whether by luck or design, but we had a good mix of participants from rural and urban representation, and also islands as well. So right the way across Scotland. I think if nobody kicks me under the laptop from the group, I think we had about 6 key points. People can obviously raise things afterwards. I think first one raised was to do with travel apps, travel applications. Varying levels of usefulness, I think, is maybe a nice way of putting it. That Certainly there was one comment that the Travel Line Scotland app was possibly the most challenging to use, as opposed to others. Google Maps, for example, was mentioned as being particularly good, but a good travel app moving forward that could maybe also indicate things like whether there was drop curbs or your access onto or egress from transport, how easy it was to cross a road, etc. When the transport stopped. And also a very pertinent reminder that regarding somebody just highlighting, in terms of transport providers, what about autism as part of that inclusive communication? And is that particular disability at the forefront of people's views? I think something else was linked up travel, if I can maybe use that as a phrase to encompass things. And actually, how easy is it to get from bus to train or from train to bus when you're traveling? And a couple of examples there that all it takes is maybe one wheelchair in a wheelchair space, and that just upsets your journey and could mean just turning around and potentially going home. And then maybe some aspects around the Thistle Assistance Card. Thistle Assistance Card. And could that actually do more? Could greater use be made of that? Along with what is the training of staff around helping disabled people? And actually, should there be a much higher and more regular focus on disability awareness training? Somebody then came along and highlighted that, and I appreciate we've all lived through COVID, and some might still be living through with long COVID. So it's probably been quite a long time since some equipment has been used on transport, and there was a view put forward that actually some of that equipment that helps disabled people might have been poorly maintained or maybe even not maintained. And also, staff may have gone through training to use that equipment, but during the period of time I've just highlighted, maybe they've not gone through a refresher or more training, and maybe it's time to revisit that. There was, and quite rightly as well, bearing in mind our people participating, some specific rural issues. Whether that be living on Skye and bus services, which were highlighted as particularly poor, or West Coast, and particularly the West Coast mainline train service was highlighted as having significant challenges. I think one of the things for Disability Equality Scotland to take away, there was more than one participants put forward that maybe there's a role moving forward, a greater role for access panels moving forward with looking at travel and transport for disabled people. And I'm hoping genuinely that that's a reasonable overview of our discussions.
Thank you so much. That sounds like you got through quite a lot in that time, which is fantastic to hear. So we'll move on to room 3. Lucy, if you'd like to come in and share some thoughts on that.
Thanks, Theo. So we were also the information and customer service themes. So I actually think a lot of what's been said already we covered in our room as well. But just to add to that, around information and journey planning, a sort of solution or takeaway or successful action would be to put more people in like ticket offices, on transport, on telephone helplines, because a lot of the journey planning is around digital, your apps, websites. If someone doesn't have a smartphone, that is automatically going to limit their ability to plan a journey or to get assistance while on a journey. So it's around that physical sort of live assistance to assist with planning. Community transport, we spoke about how valuable community transport providers can be. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the BSL. How valuable community transport providers can be, but obviously as a result of COVID and other factors, there is less volunteers at the moment. And also they're not very well sort of marketed or advertised, probably because they're at capacity, but people don't know they're available to them, which again is an issue when it comes to planning a journey, because if people don't know what's available to them, it makes it difficult to plan a journey. There was a few points on staff training as well, some examples of good practice from particular bus companies who require mandatory training for drivers, and then others that don't require any mandatory training, and that's felt by disabled people. They can see the difference when training hasn't been a requirement. So obviously mandatory training being an action to take away. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. There was a few others, as I say, that have already been touched on, and I'd see in the chat as well, just on Blue Badge, there's a few points that I'm happy to follow up on after this webinar.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lucy. That was fantastic. Moving on to room 4, Maureen, if you'd like to come on and share some thoughts around your discussion there.
Yes, hello. So theme 4 was around engagement and participation. And I'm really sorry, there was loads of people that never get a chance to speak. We kind of get bogged down a bit and people giving personal examples, which we need to hear. There's people that have been stuck at home for years. There's people who have tried to contact the local access panel. They're not getting through to them for whatever reason. They're not able to participate. And there's just, there was a general feeling in our room that engagement and participation isn't something that's successful. Public service bodies are not listening. Disabled people feel when they go along, they're getting drowned out by environmental factors or transport providers or trade union representatives. And there was a suggestion that we need to give greater voice and greater importance to local access panels, maybe making them more important to local government and local authorities to listen to them. So yes, the general consensus was that disabled people are not being listened to and their views are not being taken on board, and it's really hard to be heard because they're seen as such a small part of the population. People also find it difficult to find where they can engage in this type of event, where, could they publicise it on buses or trains or something, so as to let people, more disabled people know that it's available and it's a chance to be able to air their views on what to do with accessible travel. So that, I think, covers that. I hope I didn't miss anything.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Maureen, and raised some really interesting points as well about the importance of engagement and participation. That's fantastic. So moving on to room 5, James, if you'd like to share your discussion.
Yeah, no worries. We were also covering engagement and participation, and the themes that came up were kind of similar to what Maureen covered there. There was a lot around inclusive communication and accessible information, so ensuring that consultations are available in accessible formats and also through accessible channels, so that there's enough out there to ensure that people can contribute in the format that meets their own needs. We also talked about how when consultations launch, that they still tend to have lots of jargon, for example, so that it's coming back to ensuring that these kind of accessible information principles are applied, so that when the consultation launches, everybody is able to take part. So it's also about ensuring that you have information available, for example, in easy read. But yeah, we also talked about complaints procedures and how that can be quite a complicated process, and in part that's because it differs across different modes of transport and there's no real universal way of actually complaining. But then linked to that as well, there was also a discussion around actually seeing the outcome of that, and I think that also applies to consultation in general. There's maybe a bit of an overload in terms of the amount of consultation that takes place, and then it's actually showing how that's making a difference, getting that message across to the people that are actually involved in the consultation process and where that information. So there's a bit around transparency. But yeah, we also discussed the sort of marketing promotion side of things, and how do people in local communities actually find out about these consultations. And it's been about, it's mindful about people who are digitally excluded. There was a bit of discussion around, consultations that are maybe launched online and people might not be able to see that. So it's looking at how do you actually get the key messages into the communities. And then I think that also does tie into the different groups that you would be looking to engage with. And in that sense, you would also be looking to engage with national DPOs and access panels across Scotland. I'm just checking to see if there was any other points there. I think that really covers it, but we also did have a bit of a chat around the hate crime charter. And I think generally it's seen as a positive project, but key messages out there wider through different, if that's modes of transport, or looking at also the training, something that's meaningful. And yeah, so ultimately the and
Thank you, James. That was brilliant, and again, so many points touched on in such a short amount of time. That was fantastic. It's been really great to hear that you all had such positive kind of discussions, and that so many important points were raised. I know that we are slightly running over time, but I as planned. And so I'd like to invite either Lynn or Stephen if they'd like to comment on anything that was raised, or we can go into a question or two if they would prefer.
Thanks, Theo. Can I come in? For really valuable input there. I mean, a lot of what I've heard has really, I think the point I was making, in that we things over and over again, and we really need to find addressing these and making a meaningful difference. But I mean, there's some also some really useful new insights coming through as well. I don't know if Lynn wants to say a few words summing up.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Really good discussion in our group, and great to hear the feedback from all the other groups, and I'm really looking forward to getting. One of the questions that someone put in the chat in our group was, if Transport Scotland keep hearing the same things, why is that the case? And I think, Stephen, you've shared that it's time for that to move past that, so we can hear different things as well, and we can hear progress on things, and positive stories, rather than all being the challenges that we face as disabled people. But lots of good things that have come out there, lots of ideas have been passed over, and how Disability Equality Scotland can help have these conversations. And myself and the team will certainly be going away and looking at how best we can share the news about consultations and this work that's ongoing, and working alongside Stephen and his team to make things better. Thanks, Theo.
Thank you so much, Stephen and Lynn. It was great to hear those kind of closing remarks. I'm aware that we are running out of time, and so I think rather than trying to tackle all the questions that are coming in the chat, I think it might be best to tackle those via kind of email. What we're going to do is all the questions that are in the chat and all the questions raised within the breakout rooms will be put to the panel, and we will be in touch in response to those questions over the coming weeks. And so we will make sure that these issues are raised and that they are logged as part of the webinar summary reports, and that they are reflected in the information as well. But I don't want to keep you here too much longer. So thank you all so much for coming to this event. It's been really, really valuable to the research and to the report that is going to be coming out of this. So following on from this event, we will be sharing a survey along with some other information so that you can reflect on your experiences and maybe share further views or ideas that may have come up for you. So please look out for that and do send as much information as possible. And then we will have a summary report, and the recording of today will be on our website in the coming weeks as well, as a further resource. So I just want to thank you all for participating today and sharing your thoughts. And thank you to our presenters, Lynn and Stephen, and to our facilitators and note takers as well. And thank you to the communications team and all the DES staff and all the Transport Scotland staff working on this. And thank you to our BSL interpreters and captioners as well. It's been really valuable to hear all your thoughts, and this will be reflected in the research project that I am undertaking. So thank you all so much for your time, and have a wonderful day.